Chapter 19. The train went through villages and farms, open plains and mountains. At the first sight of the mountains, Jaime remembered what Pancho had said. There'll be other mountains, other volcanoes, but if you think of each different one as Tacana, you'll never be far from home. Home. How long ago since he'd been home? 1 week, 2? Jaime couldn't remember. Too much had happened. For now, whether he liked it or not, the top of the train was his home. Two boys, Lalo and Victor, also inhabited the top of their boxcar. They said they were brothers from Guatemala. Lalo, squat, with straight hair, looked nothing like Victor, who was tall with tightly curled hair. Like Rafa, they liked to talk. Lalo, a football. He seemed to know every professional player in Latin America, while Victor's interest remained on Vida and how she was found. Does she bite? Will she attack anyone? Does she protect Usted? Victor asked, his head cradled in his arms as he looked up from his lying down position and winked at Angela, who returned his advance with a seething one of her own. She hasn't bitten anyone yet, Zavi said. But she was used in dogfights, so she knows how to take care of herself, Angela insisted, while keeping a hand on Vida. The dog took that moment to roll over on her back and expose her stitches in favor of a belly rub. Angela leaned over on the pretense of checking her wound, but Jaime noted the way her eyes narrowed and the harsh tone of her voice when she spoke to them. These weren't boys she would try to mother. Speaking of biters, Jaime licked his finger and smudged out a line of the graffiti he was drawing on top of the boxcar with a chunk of chalk rock he'd found along the tracks. What do you guys think of Luis Suarez? The conversation shifted from Vida and Angela to the Uruguayan football player known for using his teeth in games. When they exhausted that topic, any reference to Vida or Angela had been forgotten. That night, they shared some of their limited food with Lalo and Victor, who only had a bag of stale potato chips and a flask of something to share in return. Victor laughed when the other three refused a swig. Its smell, like paint thinner, was enough to bring Jaime close to motion sickness. When the other boys fell asleep with loud snores, Jaime, Angela, and Zavi took turns keeping watch from their spot atop the flat boxcar. Zavi kept reminding them about the rules of riding the trains. Never let down your guard. Never trust anyone. Never look down while jumping from one car to the other. Never pee into the wind. And like Angela had mentioned, while they were inside the boxcar being cooked alive, never ever take off your shoes. Jaime insisted on taking the cold pre-dawn watch while Angela and Zavi slept facing each other, with Vida cuddling between them like a chaperone. Lalo and Victor snored away, too drunk, it seemed, to notice anything. An hour before sunrise, and the sky was just beginning to change colors, the night chill remained, giving the air a crisp, fresh smell, with none of the train fumes that had lingered before. A perfect, peaceful time. If Miguel could see the same color display from heaven, Jaime knew he'd be impressed too. Jaime rolled onto his stomach and tuned out the rumble of the train as he focused on the cows grazing with calves at their sides. One little fellow couldn't have been more than a few hours old by the way his long legs went off into different directions as he tried to scramble away from the giant iron worm. The train passed the calf in seconds, but Jaime kept the memory in his mind. In his sketchbook, he drew the calf with awkward legs as he loped back to his mama. So quiet, this was definitely the best time to sketch. Plus, the train moved slowly enough at the moment that the wind wasn't whipping the pages from his numb hands. He'd never seen so much open space, never properly seen the sunrise. If only he had his paints. If only he could freeze this moment forever. A huge yawn escaped his mouth. He stayed stretched out on his stomach over the boxcar with his nose close to the pages. The calf's eyes were tricky. Jaime hadn't seen them from his viewpoint, above the pasture. He closed his own eyes for a second to think about it. He wanted curiosity and fear in the eyes, but couldn't remember the correct shape. Did cows have big circular type eyes, or were they more like sideways eggs? What if cows had laid eggs? Wouldn't it be fun to search the vast ranch land for freshly laid cow eggs? Bleep! Jaime, how could you? Jaime sat up with a jerk. The sun was fully up, and so were Angela and Zavi. He glanced at his drawing, where his cheek had smudged the calf so it now looked like a blob with spaghetti legs. What happened? He asked. You fell asleep, genius. Angela looked like she was about to hit him, and now Lalo and Victor are gone with our backpacks. Jaime got to his feet. The train was rocking back and forth, but he'd gotten used to the motion and couldn't keep his balance. He looked up and down as if expecting the backpacks to have shifted to the side. But there was nothing on their boxcar except the three of them, a dog and his sketchbook pillow. The rest of the train stretched in both directions. Other people perched on many of the other cars, and some balanced on the hinges between the cars, ready for a quick getaway. It'd be near impossible to catch Lalo and Victor, if they were even still on the train. I I didn't mean to. Jaime patted his pants pocket as if the backpacks had mysteriously shrunk or were somehow sticking on him. It was cold. I just closed my eyes for a second. He searched the boxcar again. Sometimes things had a way of being invisible when they were right in front of your eyes. His pencil had rolled over the lip of the boxcar, but no bags. He pocketed the pencil before he lost that too. How could you be so stupid? Angela continued in a low, angry voice. The whole point of having someone keep watch was so this wouldn't happen. Pancho warned us to be careful trusting people. What if they had attacked us? Vita would have bitten him, he said in a soft, unconvincing voice. Last, he remembered, the dog was lying sound asleep between Zave and Angela, but she had also spent half a day with those boys, assumed, like he did, that they were trustworthy. I knew they couldn't be trusted. Soon as I figured out they lied about being Guatemalan, Angela said. How did you know? Angela shook her head in anger. They kept calling us usted instead of Voss. What a pain in the... She crossed her arms over her chest and swore. She stood near the edge of the car, with her back to him. Twice Handmate caught the movement of her shoulders jerking. What did you have in the bags besides food? Zave asked in a voice that barely carried in the train's continual rumble. Angela swore some more and turned to confront them as she used her fingers to count off their last remaining possessions. A clean shirt, a pair of socks and underwear, toothbrush, the cigarettes, a few pesos for emergency, and a picture of my brother. Zave put his arm around Angela. They told him about Miguel. Jaime's bag had contained the same things except no pesos, and he had also had his pencil case with lead and colored pencils, a pencil sharpener, and a spare eraser. He had carried a family photo too, one taken before Tomas moved away. The only thing he had of his brother, at least the rest of his family, were safely drawn in his sketchbook. And your sewing kit. Jaime slapped his forehead as he cursed himself. Why had he fallen asleep? He had wanted that early morning shift to see the pre-dawn colors, and all he'd done was outline a stupid calf. Now, when they had to use some of the money sewed into their jeans, how were they supposed to repair them so no one would steal the rest? Angela got a funny look on her face and then dug in her front pocket. From there, she pulled out a piece of cardboard with needles, thread, and a pair of tiny scissors, all that fit in her palm. I cut one of Vita's stitches yesterday, but thought they needed to stay in a bit longer. I put this in my pocket instead of back in my bag. You're lucky, Zave said. They can come in handy. It could have been worse. Oh yes, needles and thread will definitely keep us alive. Angela gave Jaime a look of annoyance and turned so her back faced him. Jaime returned to sulking with his knees to his chest and picked the dry grass from his shoelaces. He couldn't even feel happy that at least they still had their shoes. I'm so sorry, he mumbled. Vita wagged her tail with her head hung low as if she were sorry, too, for not noticing the boys taking off with their bags. She gave Jaime a little kiss on his palm. It almost made him smile. Zave put his hand on Jaime's shoulder. Don't beat yourself up about it. It could have happened to anyone. I fell asleep for a few minutes during my shift, too. Yeah, but no one stole from us then. What are we going to eat now? Angela gestured at the arid vegetation. Gone were the lush greenery and tropical fruit trees of home in southern Mexico. Now they were in open ranch lands, where there wasn't even a cow in sight, just endless patches of dry grass and scattered bushes. There hadn't been much food left in the backpacks. A half-squash guava and avocado, some tortilla scraps, the turron, and water bottle Jaime had been saving. Hardly enough for one meal for one person. Still, it had been something. His stomach rumbled. We'll see what we can find next time we get off the train, Zave reassured them. We'll be fine. God will take care of us. I'm sorry, Jaime said again, but Angela turned away, not ready to forgive him. Nothing Jaime could do changed her mood. She spent the rest of the day snapping at him and making him feel like he was in the way. When they changed trains in Torreon, she wanted him to go off with Vita and leave her and Zave alone for a while. Zave, however, said absolutely not. Torreon and northern Mexico were run by a drug cartel called Los Fuegos. More than ever, Zave said, they had to stick together. Jaime mentally thanked Zave for sticking up for him. On the other hand, if Zave weren't there, his cousin wouldn't be treating him like a pesky fruit fly. Back home, when Angela had gone off with her friends, she had never made him feel like a little kid. They had always been equal. Even when she mothered and ordered him around, he'd never seen her like this. It was as if Lalo and Victor had taken Angela away too and replaced her with this alien. In Torreon, they kept a lookout for Los Fuegos. They took turns guzzling water at a fountain in the park and found a half-eaten sandwich in the trash. There was so much chile on it, Jaime thought a hole would burn through his tongue. They snuck behind a grocery store and in the dumpster found a few rotten tomatoes and a loaf of sliced white bread with a hole in the plastic. where mice had gnawed it. A few times Vita's hackles raised along her spine, and she cocked her head to unknown sounds, but no one confronted them. When they jumped on the train again, Angela seemed to be in a better mood. At least she wasn't giving Jaime dirty looks, but she did ignore him as she and Zavi talked in low whispers, interrupted by giggles, as the train rolled out of Torreon. Would she abandon him? The possibility made him almost ill with fear. He stared at the sun setting behind a mountain. The way the red melted into yellows, greens, and purples and seemed to stretch to the ends of the earth did nothing for him. What was the point of this sunset, or any sunset, and that mountain all ugly and bare? It looked nothing like Vulcan Takana back home. He had only had one pencil left, but he didn't want to remember this moment, nor this desolate place, where few things grew except prickly cactus and scraggly grass, where Angela could leave him at any moment. His skin burned hot and dry from spending all his day in the scorching sun. He hated this train, hated this land, and hated this trip. He wanted to go home, have a bath, eat everything in the house, and let his mama tuck him into the hammock outside. It'd be worth facing the alphas if it meant being home. He buried his hands into Vita's fur and wished Angela would stop giggling. Wake up, Angela cried. Jaime sat up with a jerk. Headlights from 2 trucks sliced into the dark night alongside the slow-moving train. A cry came from the front of the train and passed down the cars. Los Fuegos! Los Fuegos, who made the alphas back home seemed like annoying fleas. When they weren't trafficking drugs into Los Estados Unidos, they raided cities and trains, demanded pay, and killed whoever got in their way. It was said they etched marks on their arms to keep a tally of their murders. 4 figures scrambled up the ladders of the front cars, and a scream cut into the night. Get off, Zavi urged. He tucked Vita under his arm and pointed to the ladder with his free hand. Jump clear of the wheels. Jaime shoved his sketchbook into the front of his pants and patted his pocket to check for his remaining pencil. Still there, he hurried down the boxcar's ladder. The ground looked hard and far away from the last rung, but he didn't have a choice. Another scream pierced the night. Glints of metal shone from the men on top of the train like they were swinging swords or machetes. Jaime glanced up to make sure Angela was above him before flinging himself to the ground. He landed on his side and rolled until he came to a stop. His shoulder and thigh hurt from the impact, but he didn't think any bones were broken. He looked up in time to see Angela land on the ground, and a second later, Zavi with Vita in his arm. Come on, let's go! Zavi dashed to Angela and helped her up while waving at Jaime to run. Only a few trees were scattered across the dry land. The emptiness made it feel like they were the last people on Earth. Nothing around them would offer protection. Run to the hill, Zavi yelled. In the moonlight, Jaime could just make out a dark looming shape in the distance. Bright lights from a third truck turned on directly in front of him. The contrast between the dark night seconds before and the spotlight was too much. He shielded his eyes and dodged to the side. The roar of an engine came from behind him. There's one of the bleeps over there, a voice cackled behind him. Let's see how far the little turd can run. Jaime put on an extra burst of speed. His sketchbook shifted to poke him in the stomach, but he didn't let that stop him. The headlights gained on him. There was no way he could outrun a truck. Impossible. But you can turn faster, said a voice in his head. He could almost feel the heat from the engine when he darted to the right. He was so close to the car, he felt the swish of air near his head and knew he'd come close to meeting a baseball hat or machete. Behind him, the truck skidded and kicked up a cloud of dust as it tried to turn. Over there, to the left, the voice said again. In the moment, without headlights glaring at him, Jaime noticed a hole in the ground just ahead. He ran. With all his might, hoping the scant moonlight wasn't playing tricks on him, hoping the truck's headlights didn't spot him before he got there. The hole was small, probably made by a coyote or another animal. Still, he kicked his legs to wiggle in deep inside, leaving only his shoulders and head exposed. He hid his head under his arm, squeezed his eyes shut, and prayed. If I don't look at them, they won't sense me looking at them, he repeated in his head, even though Miguel always teased him for being superstitious. That trick had worked surprisingly well when he was younger playing hide and seek. Please, Miguel, help it work now. Even with his eyes squeezed tight, the change in darkness told him the headlights were passing over him, searching, seeking. He didn't move a hair, even with dust entering his nose. But then the truck roared off in a different direction. He blew the dirt out of his nose with a sneeze. It was impossible. The lights had been right on him. Had Miguel, but the thought left his mind as a scream forced to open his eyes and lift his head. Angela! He called out, then stopped, fearing he'd just been given them both away. If those guys dared lay one finger on her, he knew why everyone kept saying it wasn't safe for girls to make this journey. He knew why Joaquin pretended to be a boy. He knew what they'd do to his cousin if they caught her. Angela! Better they get him than hurt her. He pushed against the dirt to free himself from his hiding place. The soft, sandy ground that had helped him fit into the small animal den crumbled and filled the gaps around him. The more he tried to get out, the more sand and dirt sifted in, and the more stuck he got. More screams came from different directions, followed by revving engines and laughter. Jaime tried to turn around in his trap. The headlights from the 3 trucks were fading away. In the distance, a steady beam of light kept moving toward the horizon. The train continued heading north without stopping. Angela! He said again. Nothing. The night became still, with only the chirp of insects. A partial moon and the stars gave off enough light to show the empty land. Everyone else who'd been on the train seemed to have disappeared, or worse. No, he couldn't let that be the last one. No, don't do this to me, Miguel. I need you. I need her. He tried again to push himself out, slowly, carefully, by twisting like a corkscrew. He was able to get some leverage until his whole chest lay flat on the ground. He extracted his legs and stood, his chest heaving to catch his breath. He brushed the dirt from his clothes. Angela! He called out one more time. He tried to remember where they'd last been together. Not too far from the railroad tracks, right before the truck's lights turned on and blinded them. That was where they had split up, but where near the tracks, he had no way of knowing. Tire tracks lined the desert ground, but they were hard to see in the night, and it was impossible to tell which ones were coming and which were going. He turned in a slow circle, pretending he was Batman with night vision. It didn't work. He saw nothing but the dark shape of the large hill, or maybe it was a volcano like Tucana. That was it. Zavi had said to head there. That was where they'd be waiting for him. Jaime jogged toward the looming shape. A couple more times he called out Angela's name but heard no reply. Maybe the wind was carrying his voice in the wrong direction. Maybe she was afraid of the thugs. One of the thugs was still around. Maybe she was still mad at him. He pushed that thought out of his mind and kept jogging. No one was at the hill or anywhere nearby. No Angela, no Zavi, no and Vita. He sat on a rock and tucked his knees to his chest as he watched for anything that might be a shadow walking in his direction. He waited and searched. No one came. The temperature began to drop. During the day, it had been scorching hot, his skin still pained with sunburn. Now the night chilled him to the bone. He pulled his shirt over his knees as he began to rock back and forth to keep warm, to stay awake, to stop himself from crying. What if no one came? What if he never saw Angela again? What if he was all alone? What if all of this, the lost bags, the lack of food and water, this whole trip, Miguel's death, was his fault?